It's 1974. A middle-aged man stands at a fence in rural Kentucky, staring across open grass fields at a low, windowless granite building in the distance. He drove 400 miles to see it. He expected something grand, towering columns, visible vault doors, maybe a museum. Instead, he sees armed patrols, watchtowers, warning signs. He asks a guard jokingly, "So, can I at least see the gold?" The guard doesn't reply. There is no public tour. The man laughs. "You mean to tell me all that gold is just sitting in there?" The guard replies calmly, "That's the idea." What the tourist doesn't know is that just months earlier, something historic happened. For the first time in over 30 years, a small group of journalists and members of Congress were allowed inside. The vault doors were opened, cameras flashed, but even then, skepticism remained. Was it all there? Was it staged? Was America's gold truly sitting behind those walls? Or is Fort Knox one of the greatest financial mysteries in modern history? In this episode of the Conspiracy Atlas, I will be talking about Fort Knox and is gold really stored there? How Fort Knox began. To understand Fort Knox, you have to understand fear. In 1933, during the Great Depression, President FDR issued Executive Order 6102. Americans were required to surrender much of their gold to the federal government. The U.S. abandoned the traditional gold standard domestically. Gold flowed into federal control, massive amounts of it. The question became, where do you store it? In 1936, the United States Bullion Depository was constructed at Fort Knox, Kentucky, adjacent to the U.S. Army post established after World War I. But why Kentucky? It's a central location, far from coastal attack, surrounded by military presence. The building itself is not flashy. Granite walls, concrete-lined vault, steel doors weighing more than 20 tons. The vault is surrounded by multiple layers of physical security, and the combination to open it is divided among multiple individuals. No single person knows the full sequence. By 1941, Fort Knox reportedly held nearly 20,000 metric tons of gold, the majority of the world's known government reserves at that time. But also during World War II, it also stored the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Magna Carta. It wasn't just gold, it was a national identity. So what's supposedly inside? Today, the U.S. Treasury states Fort Knox holds approximately 147 million ounces of gold, over half of America's financial official reserves. But here's where tension begins. The gold hasn't been fully audited in modern public way. Periodic inspections have occurred. Small group of officials and journalists have been allowed inside, most notably in 1974 and again in 2017, when then Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin toured the facility. Photos were released, bars were shown, yet critics still argued. Those were limited tours, not comprehensive audits, and that distinction matters because gold isn't just symbolic. It underpins the confidence in the U.S. dollar, historically and psychologically. Even though the U.S. left the gold standard internationally in 1971 under President Nixon, gold still serves as a financial backstop asset. So questions arise. It's all there, but why not conduct a fully transparent public audit? Why not live stream it? Why does the mystery persist? The official answer? Some say security, national stability, operational secrecy. But no skeptics, secrecy invites doubt, and doubt invites conspiracy. The heavy guarding and military presence. Fort Knox is one of the most secure facilities on Earth. Though exact security measures are classified, publicly known defenses include armed U.S. Mint police, military personnel from the adjacent Army base, fencing, alarms, surveillance, reinforced vault structure resistant to explosives. And there's the airspace restriction. The area is monitored closely. But why such intense defense? Because gold is power. If Fort Knox were breached, even symbolically, global financial markets could react violently. Confidence in the U.S. financial system is partly psychological. If your perception fractures, current stability can, wobble in its own right. Gold reserves represent sovereignty not because the dollar is backed by gold anymore, but because the reserves signal strength, and strength leaders challenge. In geopolitics, perception is reality. But there are conspiracy layers to all of this. But now we enter the gray space of things. Some theorists claim the gold was secretly removed decades ago. The bars are tungsten-filled replicas. The U.S. leased or sold its gold quietly to other countries, and the vault is actually partially empty. There is no verified evidence supporting these claims, but the persistence of the theories are revealing. Because this isn't just about gold, it's about trust in institutions. When governments refuse full transparency, even for security reasons, suspicion fills the gap. And in the digital age, suspicion spreads pretty fast, as we know. Now, to understand why Fort Knox fuels suspicion, you have to look at three pivotal pressure points in modern financial history. Number one, the 1971 Richard Nixon shock. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television. He announced that the United States would suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Until that moment, under the Bretton Woods system, foreign governments could exchange U.S. dollars for gold at $35 per ounce. After that announcement, they couldn't. The gold window was closed. Just like that, the dollar became a fiat currency, backed not by metal, but by government authority and economic strength. Supporters say it was necessary. Foreign nations were redeeming dollars for gold at sustainable rates. America's gold reserves were shrinking, but critics argue something deeper. If the gold standard had to be abandoned, how much gold was really left, and how much pressure was being concealed from the public? The so-called Nixon shock syndrome fundamentally changed the global financing world, but it also permanently shifted public trust, from tangible backing to institutional credibility. Number two, financial crisis and the erosion of trust. Let's fast forward to 2008. Major banks collapsed, the housing market imploded, Lehman Brothers fell, governments issued bailouts. Ordinary citizens lost homes, savings, and retirement accounts. In moments like that, people had to ask uncomfortable questions. If banks can fail, if institutions can collapse, if regulators can miss warning signs, then who is watching the vault? Trust in financial institutions have never fully recovered. Every crisis chips away at the confidence. And when confidence weakens, people look for anchors. Gold has historically been that anchor. Which is why Fort Knox becomes symbolic during economic turmoil. It's the physical embodiment of there's something solid behind this, even if legally there no longer is. Number three, the weight of national debt. Today, the United States carries a national debt measured in the tens of trillions of dollars. A number so large it's absolutely abstract and insane to think. Debt itself isn't unusual for modern economics, but scale changes perception. When citizens see roaring deficits, quantitative easing, stimulus packages, and expanding money supply, they ask, if currency is created digitally, if debt grows continuously, what and who stabilizes the system? The answer officially is economic productivity and global trust in the dollar. But psychologically, many people still imagine Fort Knox. A vault, gold bars, weight, something real. When debt rises and transparency feels limited, conspiracy theories don't appear out of nowhere. They fill the vacuum between official narrative and public reassurance. But why this all matters to the Fort Knox mystery? So when you combine the 1971 end of gold convertibility, repeated financial instability, expanding national debt, Fort Knox stops being just a storage facility. It becomes a symbol. Not of what backs the dollar legally, but what backs the dollar emotionally. And when emotion drives the market, and we all know it does, mystery becomes powerful. And suddenly, Fort Knox becomes symbolic. Not just a vault, but a question mark. Is America's financial foundation solid or performative? The truth is likely far less dramatic, but the secrecy ensures the myth survives. Now here's a little fun did you know. Did you know that Fort Knox does not hold all U.S. gold reserves? Significant amounts are stored at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Denver Mint, and West Point Mint. Fort Knox holds the largest share, but not the entirety of it. And unlike Fort Knox, The New York Fed stores gold for foreign nations as well, which raises another question. How much of global finance depends on vaults few citizens will ever see? So what's really inside Fort Knox? According to the U.S. Treasury, millions of ounces of gold are locked, catalog protected, but according to skeptics, a mystery protected by secrecy, heavily guarded assets within limited public verification. But here's the grounded truth. There is no verified proof the gold is missing. There is also no fully modern, publicly broadcasted audit. The vault exists. We know that. The gold likely exists, but transparency does not of what's going on. And in the absence of transparency, stories grow. Fort Knox represents more than a bullion. It represents national confidence because currencies run on belief, markets run on belief, nations run on belief. And belief, once shaken, is difficult to restore, as we know. The strongest vault in America may not be built of granite and steel. It may be built of perception. So that does it for this week's episode of the Conspiracy Atlas about Fort Knox. Now, next time you hear someone say, "Oh, it's safe at Fort Knox," ask yourself this. What is it safe from? Theft? Scrutiny? What really is going on at Fort Knox? What really is stored there? And can we trust the government by actually telling us what really is or isn't there? And this whole idea of only going in 1974 and in 2017. Why hasn't there been an audit? All these questions still need to be answered, and hopefully they will be answered. Just have to take some time and wait to see if it actually does come true. So now in the comments, let me know what you think is going on at Fort Knox. Is there gold there? Is there not gold there? Or is something else stored there? Or are all the precious kind of treasures of the world stored there for safekeeping? Like paintings or other artifacts from other nations in Fort Knox. Let me know in the comments. So that's been this week's episode of the Conspiracy Atlas. I'm your host. Thanks so much for listening. And be sure you tell your family and friends about the Conspiracy Atlas. Let them know about the conspiracies that I am discussing and talking about. Let them know to like, comment, and subscribe and get the word out of what I am doing and getting the truth out there, because the truth is out there. Thanks so much for tuning in for this week's episode of the Conspiracy Atlas. I'll see you all in the next episode.